The sound of the judge's gavel echoed through the Cleveland courtroom like a thunderclap of justice I had waited 8 endless months for. Jason Turner, who had once humiliated me in front of 200 guests on what should have been one of the happiest nights of my life, was now handcuffed, being dragged from the courtroom under the cruel glare of camera flashes. His eyes met mine for a moment, those same calculating eyes that had watched me fall to the marble floor of the reception hall as he purposefully pulled out my chair, inflicting the most devastating humiliation of my 70 years of existence. But today, finally, gloriously, the fall was his. And this time, he would have no one to help him up. How did a respectable Cincinnati widower, who had spent 5 decades building a solid reputation and a $700,000 estate, become the ruthless architect of his own revenge? How did I discover that my only daughter, the girl I had raised so lovingly after Evelyn's death, had become an unwitting accomplice to my own financial destruction? The answer lies buried in the most painful betrayal a parent can face. The moment you discover that your own flesh and blood has chosen to side with your enemies. The moment you realize you've spent your entire life preparing your daughter for the world, but you've forgotten to prepare her to recognize the predators who walk among us dressed as princes charming. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. My name is Franklin Cooper. I'm 70 years old, and I have a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family, trust, and how far a man will go when he decides he's no longer a victim. This is the story of how the fall that should have broken me forever actually gave me the strength to rise up as a giant thirsty for justice. Cincinnati's historic Union Terminal had never witnessed a betrayal as meticulously orchestrated as the one I would suffer on that cursed October night, when autumn was painting the leaves gold, and I still believed my daughter loved me unconditionally. 200 guests from Cincinnati's high society gathered in that majestic ballroom, their jewelry sparkling under the lights of the crystal chandelier imported from Europe. Dom Perignon champagne costing $300 a bottle being served in baccarat crystal flutes. The scent of white orchids, each arrangement costing $400, mingled with the Chanel perfume of the society ladies, creating an atmosphere of elegance I had dreamed of creating for my only daughter's wedding. At 70, I felt like a king walking toward the golden microphone, ready to deliver the most important speech of my life, the father of the bride speech. Melissa was radiant in her $12,000 Vera Wang gown, and I felt my heart swell with paternal pride. My daughter had found true love, or at least that was the cruel illusion I still lived under. Jason Turner stood beside me, my future son-in-law. 45 years old, with perfectly combed grey hair and a smile that radiated confidence and sincerity. His hands, which I now know to be the hands of a professional thief, gently pulled out a chair for me. "Mr. Cooper, please sit down and rest before your speech. You deserve this moment." What a thoughtful and respectful young man, I thought, feeling a surge of gratitude for the man who was joining our family. If only I had known those kind words were the same ones he had used with Martha Henderson in Springfield, Patricia Williams in Akron, Sandra Mitchell in Toledo, all women who had lost their life savings to this Armani-suited predator. But the chair wasn't there. My 70-year-old body, weakened by 2 heart attacks and hip surgery, crashed to the Italian marble floor with a crash that echoed through the room like a cannon shot. The impact reverberated through my bones like cracked bells, each vibration a symphony of pain and humiliation. My $2,000 Armani suit, the same one I had worn to my own wedding to Evelyn 48 years ago, was now stained with spilled champagne and marble dust. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony that tore through my heart when I heard the most devastating sound of my life. Melissa's nervous laughter echoing through the deathly silence of the room. My own daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders through Cincinnati parks, who I had taught to ride a bike, whose tears I had wiped away on thousands of lonely nights after her mother's death. That same daughter remained as still as a statue of ice, not even extending a finger to help her own father. The 200 guests watched in awkward silence. I could see Linda Turner, Jason's mother, whispering something in her daughter Hannah's ear, both trying to contain smirks. Peter Collins, one of Cincinnati's most respected businessmen, cleared his throat uncomfortably before dropping the knife. "Careful there, Mr. Cooper. Age is catching up with us all, isn't it?" Muffled laughter echoed through the hall like hyenas surrounding wounded prey. Reverend Harris approached with that pious expression religious people reserve for the dying, but even his gaze carried a hint of embarrassment that made me feel smaller than a bug. Jason offered his hand with a smile that now, 8 months later, I recognize as one of pure sadistic satisfaction. "Mr. Cooper, let me help you. Accidents happen. Accidents." The word echoed in my mind like a distorted echo as I rose, supported by the false hand of the man who had just humiliated me in front of Cincinnati's elite. But as I rose, a cold realization pierced my consciousness like a blade of ice. That fall had not been an accident. Jason's eyes gleamed with a light I couldn't quite interpret at the time, but which I now recognize as the gleam of a predator who had just marked his prey with blood. He had tested me in front of 200 guests, gauging my reaction, assessing my resilience, and I had failed the test miserably. The hallway of the Omni Netherland Plaza Hotel in downtown Cincinnati stretched before me like an endless tunnel of burgundy carpet and gold wallpaper, each footstep echoing not only on the polished marble, but on my soul, wounded by the humiliation of the previous night. It was 6 in the morning, and I hadn't slept a single minute. The images of the fall replayed in my mind like a horror movie on a perpetual loop. Jason's smile, Melissa's laugh, the guests' looks of pity. At 70, I had lived through 2 wars, the death of the woman I loved, the struggle to build a financial empire from nothing, but I had never felt such complete, devastating humiliation as that. I knocked on the door of room 1247 harder than I intended, my aching knuckles echoing like war drums against the solid wood. When Melissa opened it, she was wearing a pink silk robe I'd given her last Christmas, a $1,200 gift that now seemed like cruel irony. Her eyes avoided mine with a mastery that chilled my blood. It was the same evasive look her mother Evelyn used to have when she knew she'd done something terrible but couldn't bring herself to confess. The difference was, Evelyn always ended up telling me the truth. Melissa, I realized in that moment with growing horror, had learned to lie. "Dad, you're overreacting," she said, the words coming out as a tired sigh, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "It was just a silly accident. Jason is devastated by what happened. He's barely slept because he's worried so much." Devastated. The word hung in the air between us like toxic smoke. From the bedroom's marble bathroom, I could hear Linda Turner's shrill voice on the phone, each word piercing my heart like poisoned needles. "The old man is making a mountain out of a molehill, honey. Jason is an angel sent from heaven to watch over this family. This man needs to learn to accept that he's no longer the center of his daughter's universe." "Melissa," my voice came out weaker and shakier than I'd intended, weighed down by the exhaustion of a night spent in my bedroom chair, staring out the window at the Cincinnati skyline, wondering how I'd gotten to this point. I saw his eyes. I saw the satisfaction. It was purposeful, calculated, cruel. She crossed her arms over her chest, and in that gesture I recognized the stubbornness she had inherited directly from me. The same determination that had helped me build my financial empire, but which was now being used against me like a weapon. "Dad, can't you accept that I found someone who truly loves me? Ever since Mom died, don't you dare bring your mother into this conversation," I interrupted, feeling the familiar pang of longing Evelyn had left in my chest 2 years ago. a constant ache that never quite healed. Evelyn would never have allowed you to be disrespectful to your father like that. It was at that moment that Harold Cooper, my 65-year-old younger brother, appeared in the hallway like a vulture sniffing for carrion. Harold had always been envious of my financial success, my successful investments, my ability to provide a comfortable life for my family while he struggled with debt and business failures. "Franklin, for God's sake, stop this ridiculous paranoia," Harold said, his voice thick with barely concealed irritation. "The boy is trying to be part of the family, and you're treating him like a criminal. Maybe it's time to accept that you're getting older and need to trust the people around you more." Harold's words hit me like punches to the gut. Getting old. Paranoid. These were the same words I'd heard whispered by the guests the night before, the same expressions of pity and contempt that now echoed even from my own brother's mouth. The whispers of other guests in the hallway seemed to scream in my ears like ambulance sirens. An elderly woman passed us, muttering to her husband, "Isn't that the man who fell at the wedding yesterday? What an embarrassing situation." A young couple whispered to each other, "Imagine the embarrassment for the family." When I left the hotel that morning, I carried with me more than the humiliation of the previous night. I carried the crushing weight of being completely alone in the world. My daughter had chosen the side of the enemy. My brother saw me as a paranoid old man. My society friends saw me as a joke. But as I walked the familiar streets of Cincinnati, where I had built my life and my empire, a distant memory surfaced like a light at the end of a dark tunnel. Jason Turner. I had heard that name before. But where? And in what context? The answer to that question would change everything. David Reynolds's office on 4th Street downtown was a sanctuary of mahogany wood and aged leather, where the smell of pipe tobacco still clung to the walls after 30 years of friendship and business. David had been my lawyer since 1995, the man who had structured my most important investments and who was present when Evelyn and I signed our wills. If there was one person in Cincinnati I could trust completely, it was David Reynolds. "Franklin, my friend," he said, rising from his leather chair to hug me with the strength of someone who feels genuine concern. "I'm so sorry about what happened at the wedding. Clara and I were shocked by that man's rudeness." David was 68 years old, with pure white hair and blue eyes that had seen the worst aspects of human nature through decades of legal practice. When he looked at me that morning, I could see something that chilled my blood. Fear. Fear for myself. "David, I need you to look into Jason Turner," I said, sitting down in the leather chair I'd occupied hundreds of times over the years. "That name sounds familiar, but I can't remember where." He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses, the same ones he wore when he broke the news that my investments had made my family wealthy, the same ones he wore when he comforted me after Evelyn's death. "Franklin, I already started the investigation last night. What I discovered will shock you." David opened an iron drawer and removed a thick folder stuffed with documents that seemed to weigh tons when he placed it on the table. Black and white photographs, newspaper clippings, official documents, an entire life of crime documented with surgical precision. "Jason Turner owes $250,000 to various financial institutions throughout the state of Ohio," David said, his seasoned lawyer's voice thick with a concern he rarely displayed. "And that's just what we've been able to officially track. There are lawsuits in Springfield, Dayton, Toledo, Akron, a trail of destruction stretching back 15 years. He began spreading the photographs out on the table like cards from a macabre deck. Jason leaving courthouses in different cities. Jason signing documents in law firms. Jason arm in arm with older women, always smiling, always confident, always lying. "Here's Martha Henderson from Springfield," David continued, pointing to a photograph of a gray-haired woman standing next to Jason. "Widow, 72 years old, lost $180,000 to Jason Turner after he married her granddaughter. Same pattern, emotional blackmail, family manipulation, fraudulent power of attorney. My breathing grew heavier. Go on. Patricia Williams, of Akron, widow, 68 years old. $200,000 disappeared from her accounts after Jason married her daughter, Sandra Mitchell of Toledo, also widowed, 75 years old. $300,000 stolen through the same diabolical scheme. The room began to spin around me. Jason wasn't just an opportunist. He was a professional predator, an expert at identifying vulnerable families and destroying them from the inside out. David, how does he choose his victims? Always widows or widowers with significant assets and single daughters of childbearing age. Jason approaches the daughters, quickly marries them, gains the family's trust, and then begins the systematic financial destruction. The pattern is always the same. First, he publicly humiliates the victim to establish psychological dominance, then isolates the victim from the family, and finally executes the robbery through false powers of attorney. My phone rang at that moment, interrupting the most shocking revelation of my life. It was Mr. Dawson, the manager of the First National Bank, where I had kept my savings for 30 years. Mr. Cooper, I need to inform you of some unusual inquiries about your account in recent weeks. Inquiries that have not come from you, but from people claiming to represent your family's interests. My hand shook as I held the phone. What kind of consultations? Information about balances, investments, insurance policies. The caller said he was her future son-in-law and was helping with the family's financial planning. The puzzle began to form in my mind with terrifying clarity. Jason hadn't pulled out my chair out of wanton cruelty. It had been a psychological test. He wanted to see how I would react to public humiliation, whether I would fight or submit. He wanted to gauge my resilience before beginning the next phase of his diabolical plan. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Chloe Cooper, my 25-year-old niece and Harold's daughter, showed up in David's office, her eyes red from crying. "Uncle Franklin, I need to tell you something terrible," she said, her voice shaking with fear. "The night of the wedding, I heard Jason talking on the phone in the hotel garden. He was saying things like, 'The old man has a lot more money than we thought. We need to speed up the schedule, and that idiot Melissa will sign anything I ask.'" Idiot Melissa. The words echoed in the room like gunshots. The man my daughter believed loved her had referred to her using such cruel and disrespectful words. Sitting in that leather chair, surrounded by evidence of the monstrous nature of the man who had infiltrated my family, I finally understood the full extent of the danger we faced. Jason Turner wasn't just a con artist. He was a destroyer of families, a murderer of souls, a predator who had turned the art of manipulation into an exact science. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had chosen the wrong family to destroy. Franklin Cooper was not just a vulnerable widower with a naive daughter. He was a man who had built a $700,000 fortune through decades of hard work, strategic intelligence, and unwavering determination. As David organized the documents that would become the weapons of my revenge, a cold, implacable certainty settled in my chest, like eternal ice. Jason Turner had declared war on me the moment he pulled out that chair. Now he would discover that he had chosen the wrong enemy. The residential suburb of Dayton, Ohio, with its red brick houses and manicured lawns, seemed the perfect backdrop for American domesticity. But on that bleak November afternoon, it became the stage where I would witness my own daughter being turned into an unwitting accomplice in my financial destruction. I parked my silver Cadillac Escalade 2 houses down from the Turner residence, a $300,000 colonial that I later discovered had been purchased with money stolen from Sandra Mitchell. The living room's picture windows offered a clear view of the interior, where my daughter was being slowly poisoned against her own father. What I saw through those windows made me feel like I was watching a satanic ritual being performed on my family. Jason paced the room with a stack of documents in his hands, gesturing theatrically like a lawyer presenting a case to a jury. Melissa sat on the beige leather sofa, the same sofa where David had discovered Patricia Williams had signed the documents that had cost her $200,000, her hands trembling slightly as she held a Mont Blanc pen I had given her for college graduation. Hannah Turner, Jason's younger sister and clearly his accomplice, spread documents across the glass coffee table with the efficiency of a dealer dealing marked cards in an underground casino. Each piece of paper was a stab in the back of the man who had raised Melissa with unconditional love for 28 years. Linda Turner circled Melissa like a hungry vulture, her honeyed voice floating through the half-open window. "Melissa, honey, your father is getting older every day. Someone responsible needs to look out for the family's interests before it's too late. Jason just wants to protect you and make sure you're financially secure." Protect. The word made me feel sick. It was the same word Jason had used with Martha Henderson, with Patricia Williams, with Sandra Mitchell, all women now living in tiny apartments, supported by welfare after losing their life savings to this predator in an expensive suit. At that moment, my phone vibrated with an alert from First National Bank that made me feel like I'd been punched in the gut. A transfer of $50,000 had been requested from my primary savings account. $50,000, the same amount I'd saved by working 16 hours a day for 2 full years when I started my business. My hands shook as I dialed Mr. Dawson's number. "Mr. Cooper, the transfer was requested through a power of attorney that arrived here 20 minutes ago. We have all the documentation signed and notarized." Power of attorney. The word struck me like a lightning bolt, making terrifying connections in my mind. Through the window, I could see Melissa signing another document, her expression confused but confident. She had no idea that each signature was a death sentence for our family's financial security. Jason approached her from behind, placing his hands possessively on her shoulders, the same gesture he had made with the other victims, as documented in the photographs David had collected. "Perfect, my love. You are now completely protected. If anything happens to your father, you will have complete control over everything. You won't have to depend on anyone. Total control." The words echoed in my mind like death knells. Jason was turning my daughter into the executor of my own financial execution, and she was signing the papers with the innocence of a lamb being led to the slaughter. Linda Turner leaned over Melissa like a witch, whispering evil incantations. "Honey, you're doing the right thing. Your father lived a good life, built a good fortune. Now it's time to ensure that wealth is preserved for future generations." Hannah Turner added her own dose of venom. "Melissa, you saw how messed up your father was in the marriage. The falling out, the paranoia about Jason. These are clear signs that he needs help managing his own affairs." Paranoia, confusion, signs of senility. The words they used to describe my natural reaction to betrayal were the same ones they had used to manipulate the other victims. It was a perfectly rehearsed script, a sinister play where my daughter was simultaneously actress and audience. At that moment, the truth hit me with the force of a hurricane. The humiliation at my wedding had been just the appetizer. The main course was the systematic and calculated theft of my entire life, executed through the psychological manipulation of the person I loved most in the world. Jason had studied my family like a general, surveying the terrain before a battle. He knew Melissa was my weak point, that I would do anything to protect her. He used this unconditional love as a weapon against me, turning my greatest strength into my greatest vulnerability. As I drove back to Cincinnati through the gathering afternoon fog, a bitter, crystal-clear truth sank into my mind. My only child, the girl I had raised alone after Evelyn's death, had signed my financial death warrant without even knowing it. But Jason Turner had made a fatal miscalculation. He had assumed that a 70-year-old man, humiliated and betrayed, would simply resign himself to his fate. He didn't know he was dealing with Franklin Cooper, a man who had survived the Great Recession of 2008, who had rebuilt his financial empire 3 times, who had learned that true strength comes not from avoiding falls, but from how you choose to rise after them. The war was just beginning, and this time I would not be caught off guard. Toledo, Ohio, had always been a city of honest workers and traditional families, but on that frigid December morning, it seemed like the most appropriate setting in the world to discover the full extent of the conspiracy that was methodically destroying everything I had worked for during my 70 years of life. Notary Mrs. Patterson's office was in a 19th-century red-brick building, where the smell of stale coffee and carbon paper permeated the air like the ghosts of 1,000 legal transactions. She greeted me with that solemn expression legal professionals reserve for delivering the worst possible news. "Mr. Cooper, I need to be straightforward with you," she said, pushing a thick folder across the dark wooden desk. "Your daughter has been here 3 times in the last 2 weeks, and the powers of attorney she signed are troubling." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. What I saw felt like I was reading my own financial death certificate. 3 different powers of attorney, each more devastating than the last, all written in the familiar handwriting I had helped shape when Melissa was learning to write at 5 years old. The first power of attorney gave Jason Turner full authority over my bank accounts. The second granted him full authority over my investments and stocks. The third, and this one felt like a knife had been pierced through my heart, transferred control of my properties, including the house where Evelyn and I had lived happily for 45 years. "She seemed nervous during the signings," Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice filled with genuine concern that touched me deeply. Her fiancé was always by her side, directing her where to sign, explaining the legal terms. He repeatedly said it was to protect the family's interests in case something happened to you. Protection. That word had become a curse in my life. Jason had used Melissa's love for me as fuel to fuel his own crimes. He had turned a daughter's natural concern for her elderly father into a weapon of financial destruction. "Mrs. Patterson, are these powers of attorney legally binding?" She sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that carries decades of experience with the darker nature of human beings. "Unfortunately, Mr. Cooper, yes. Your daughter is of legal age, was apparently in full possession of her faculties, and the documents were duly notarized. From a legal standpoint, Jason Turner now controls virtually all of your assets." The room began to spin around me. In a matter of weeks, I had gone from an independent, financially secure man to a prisoner of the very wealth I had spent a lifetime accumulating. The confrontation with Harold Cooper that afternoon was even more devastating than discovering the powers of attorney. I found my brother at his insurance office on the outskirts of Toledo, the same office where he had struggled with debt and business failures while I was building my empire. "Harold, I need your help," I said, placing copies of the powers of attorney on his cluttered desk. "Jason Turner is systematically stealing from our family." He scanned the documents with an expression I couldn't quite interpret until he began speaking. "Franklin, you're getting completely paranoid. Maybe it's time to hand over the responsibilities to the younger generation." Harold's words hit me like bullets. My own brother, the man I'd shared my childhood with, was betraying me too. "Harold, can't you see? This man is a professional criminal." "What I see is a 70-year-old man who can't accept that his daughter has grown up and made her own choices," Harold replied, his voice thick with a resentment I'd never sensed before. "Maybe Jason is right to protect Melissa from his controlling tendencies." Controlling tendencies. It was as if Harold were reading from a script prepared by the Turners. In that moment, a terrible truth crystallized. Jason hadn't just manipulated Melissa, he'd poisoned my entire family against me. Alone in that Toledo hotel room that night, I pulled out the photograph of Evelyn I always carried in my wallet. Her blue eyes seemed to gaze at me with that quiet wisdom I so admired. "Evelyn, my love, what would you do if you were here? How would you save our daughter?" The answer came as a painful memory. Evelyn always said that true strength lies not in avoiding falls, but in how we choose to get up after them. "Franklin," she used to say, "when someone pushes you to the ground, you have two choices. Lie there and moan, or get up stronger than you were before." That night, as snow began to fall over Toledo, I made the most important decision of my 70 years of life. Jason Turner had miscalculated. He assumed that an elderly man, humiliated and betrayed by his own daughter, would simply resign himself to his fate. But he didn't know Franklin Cooper. He didn't know the man who had built a $700,000 empire from 20 borrowed dollars. He didn't know the father who would fight to his dying breath to protect the legacy he intended to leave his daughter, even if she couldn't see it was being destroyed. War was officially declared, and this time I would not be the victim. Columbus, Ohio, with its wide avenues and imposing government buildings, offered the perfect setting to begin my meticulous counter-offensive, far from the prying eyes of Cincinnati and the toxic influence of the Turner family. David Reynolds had chosen a discreet cafe in German Village for our clandestine meeting, where the centuries-old brick walls and dark wood tables would hold the secrets of the strategy that would change everything. Clara Reynolds, David's wife and Evelyn's best friend for over 20 years, joined us with a warm embrace that reminded me that there were still genuinely loyal people in this corrupted world. "Franklin, you're not alone in this war," Clara said, her brown eyes shining with the same fierce determination I'd seen in Evelyn when she defended our family. "Evelyn would never forgive me if I allowed this parasite to destroy everything you fought for." David spread out on the small coffee table an impressive collection of evidence he had gathered over the past few weeks. High-resolution photographs, official documents, bank records, an entire life of crime documented with surgical precision that would make any district attorney salivate. "Franklin, I've managed to track Jason Turner's complete history across 7 different states," David said, his low voice thick with professional satisfaction. 5 fraudulent companies, 17 embezzlement charges, 3 arrest warrants in various jurisdictions, and a network of family complicity that includes Linda and Hannah Turner as active accomplices. Each photograph told a story of devastation. Jason leaving courthouses in different cities, always with that confident smile. Jason signing documents in law offices while elderly women cried in the background. Jason arm in arm with his victims at romantic dinners hours before draining their bank accounts. "But there's something even more important," David continued, opening a red folder that looked like it contained state secrets. "I found 5 women willing to testify against Jason Turner in court. They all lost amounts ranging from $150,000 to $400,000 using exactly the same diabolical method." Clara leaned across the table, her voice hushed but urgent. "Franklin, one of those women is Dorothy Mitchell, 82 years old. She lost $380,000, her entire retirement, and now lives in a subsidized apartment eating dog food because she can't afford decent food." The image of Dorothy Mitchell eating dog food because of Jason Turner ignited something primal and ferocious inside me. This monster wasn't just stealing money, he was murdering the dignity and destroying the final years of innocent people's lives. "David, what's the plan?" The strategy we devised in that cafe was simultaneously simple and lethal. First, I would secretly document all unauthorized financial transactions, creating an irrefutable trail of evidence. Second, I would collect recordings of Jason's psychological manipulation of Melissa. Third, and most devastating, I would set a trap that would force Jason to fully expose himself in front of witnesses. "Franklin, Are you absolutely sure you want to go down this path? Clara asked, touching my hand with the maternal gentleness Evelyn often displayed. Once we start, there's no turning back. This will destroy Jason Turner completely. I stared out the cafe's fogged-up window, watching families strolling along Columbus's historic streets. Fathers and daughters holding hands, grandfathers pushing strollers, elderly couples sharing umbrellas in the light drizzle. All the normal, healthy family relationships Jason Turner had tried to assassinate in my life. Clara, a week ago, I discovered that my own daughter signed documents that left me without access to $600,000 that took me 50 years to accumulate. If that doesn't justify an all-out war, then absolutely nothing does. David opened a final folder, revealing something that made me smile for the first time in weeks, a complete dossier on Linda and Hannah Turner's criminal activities. Franklin, the Turner family women aren't just passive accomplices. They're active partners in the scheme. Linda forges documents. Hannah seduces bank employees to obtain confidential information. It's a complete family operation. At that moment, revenge stopped being just about getting my money back or restoring my dignity. It became a sacred mission to protect other families from going through the same hell Jason Turner had created in my life. David, I want Jason Turner destroyed so completely that he can never hurt another family. I want him to pay for Dorothy Mitchell eating dog food. I want him to pay for every tear he caused, for every dream he shattered, for every family he tore apart. The war was about to begin, and this time I was armed to the teeth. Cleveland, Ohio, with its imposing skyline reflecting off the dark waters of Lake Erie, seemed like the perfect cinematic backdrop for the final showdown that would determine the fate of my family and justice for all of Jason Turner's victims. The private room I rented at the Ritz-Carlton cost $3,000 for one afternoon, but it would be worth every penny when it became the stage for the complete destruction of the man who had tried to annihilate me. I had professional recording equipment installed, hidden behind the red velvet curtains. Every word, every denial, every lie would be documented for posterity. Melissa arrived hand in hand with Jason, both beaming with the arrogant confidence of someone who believes they've won a war without realizing the real battle hasn't even begun. She wore a navy blue dress I'd bought her last Christmas, $4,000 that now seemed like an ironic investment in my own destruction. Jason squeezed my hand with that excessive force insecure men use to demonstrate dominance, his eyes shining with the cruel satisfaction of someone who believes he's completely tamed his prey. Mr. Cooper, what an honor that you finally want to talk like civilized men about the future of your family. Linda Turner and Hannah entered the ballroom like queens visiting conquered subjects, their expensive jewelry sparkling under the crystal chandelier. They didn't know that each piece had been purchased with the financial blood of innocent women like Dorothy Mitchell. "Daddy, I'm so glad you finally want to accept Jason as part of the family," Melissa said, kissing my cheek with that sweet deceit that broke my heart. She truly believed I had surrendered, that I had accepted my defeat with senile dignity. What none of them knew was that David Reynolds was sitting at an inconspicuous table in the corner of the room, disguised as a common businessman drinking coffee, with 2 briefcases full of evidence that would turn this family gathering into a court of law. I began slowly, almost conversationally, savoring each word like a rare wine. "Jason, had you ever been to Springfield before you met Melissa?" His expression changed subtly, like an actor trying to remember his lines in a long-rehearsed play. "Springfield? No. I don't know anyone in Springfield, Mr. Cooper." "Interesting," I said, nodding to David, who stood and began walking toward us with the precision of a soldier marching into battle. "Because Martha Henderson of Springfield has a very different story to tell." David placed the first photograph on the polished mahogany table, Jason arm in arm with Martha Henderson in a romantic restaurant, both smiling like a loving couple. The date in the corner showed it was taken 3 years before he met Melissa. The silence in the room became so thick I could hear the ticking of the Swiss clock on the wall. Melissa stared at the photograph with an expression of growing confusion, like someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "This is Martha Henderson, a 72-year-old widow," I continued, my voice gaining strength and authority. "She lost $180,000 to Jason Turner after he married her granddaughter, using exactly the same manipulation techniques he used on you, Melissa." David began spreading more photos across the table like a card dealer revealing a winning hand. Jason with Patricia Williams in Akron, Jason with Sandra Mitchell in Toledo, Jason with Dorothy Mitchell in Cincinnati, a gallery of victims that spanned years of systematic crime. "And here's Patricia Williams of Akron," I continued, watching with savage satisfaction as Jason's face paled with each revelation. $200,000 stolen. Sandra Mitchell of Toledo, $300,000. Dorothy Mitchell, 82 years old, $380,000. She now eats dog food to survive, Jason. Dog food. Linda Turner tried to interrupt in her shrill voice. "This is a ridiculous setup. Jason would never—" "Jason has 23 outstanding cases in 7 different states," David interrupted, with the cold authority of a district attorney, placing stacks of official documents on the table, including 5 arrest warrants for financial fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. It was in that magical, terrifying moment that I saw complete recognition dawn in Melissa's eyes. All the fragments connected in her mind like pieces of a macabre puzzle. The fall at the wedding, the calculated pull of the chair, Jason's satisfied smile, the pressure to sign documents, Linda Turner's venomous whispers. "My God," she whispered, her voice shattering like glass. "The wedding, the chair. You did it on purpose. You humiliated me on purpose." Jason tried his last desperate card, placing his hand on Melissa's arm with false tenderness. "My love, they're making all this up to separate us. You know I love you." "Love," I said, pulling the most devastating document of all from the folder. "David, show them the recording." David activated a small digital recorder, and Jason's voice echoed through the room like a demon's confession. "That idiot Melissa will sign anything I ask. The old man has a lot more money than we thought. We need to speed up the schedule before he suspects something. Idiot Melissa." The words floated through the air like bullets that hit my daughter right in the heart. I could see the exact moment her love for Jason died. It was like watching a light go out forever. "Melissa," I whispered, reaching out my hand to her, "you must choose, now, forever. Your true family, or the predators who tried to destroy us." The next 5 seconds were the longest of my life, as I waited to find out if my daughter had been lost forever or if there was still hope for salvation for our shattered family. 6.5 months later, the steps of the Cleveland courthouse had never witnessed justice as complete and devastating as the one I experienced when Jason Turner was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for multiple counts of financial fraud, document forgery, and criminal conspiracy. Judge Henderson, ironically a distant cousin of Martha Henderson, one of Jason's victims, had been merciless in his sentencing. "Mr. Turner, you have turned emotional manipulation into an exact science. You have destroyed families, murdered dreams, and condemned elderly people to lives of misery. This court considers your crimes among the most despicable it has ever tried." Linda Turner received 8 years for document forgery and money laundering. Hannah Turner was sentenced to 6 years for bank fraud and employee seduction. The entire family was wiped out in a single court session that lasted less than 2 hours. Mr. Dawson greeted me as I left with a genuine smile I hadn't seen in months. "Mr. Cooper, we've recovered $620,000 of the $650 that were illegally transferred. Not only is your account safe, the interest and penalties applied to Jason have increased your net worth. $620,000 recovered. A life's work restored, plus the indescribable satisfaction of seeing Jason Turner trade in his Armani suits for the orange uniforms of the federal penitentiary. Melissa tried to reach out as I descended the courthouse's marble steps, but something fundamental had broken between us irreparably. 6 months of intensive therapy had helped her understand how she'd been manipulated, but they couldn't erase the fact that she'd chosen the side of my enemies when I needed her loyalty most. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I didn't know. I really didn't know," she said, tears streaming down her face like rivers of belated regret. I stopped and looked deeply into her eyes, the same blue eyes as Evelyn's, but now filled with the heavy guilt of someone who discovered too late that she had betrayed the person who loved her most in the world. "Melissa, forgiveness is something built through consistent actions over time, not something obtained through desperate words on courthouse steps. It wasn't cruelty. It was necessary protection. Protection against future manipulation, against my own natural tendency to forgive too easily, against the very real possibility that other predators might see me as a vulnerable target because of my age. But Daddy, I learned. I'll never—" "Melissa, you signed documents that took control of $600,000 from me without even reading what you were signing. You laughed when I was humiliated at your wedding. You defended a man who called me a paranoid old man while he systematically stole everything I worked for 50 years. Each word was a necessary stab, but it hurt me as much as it hurt her. When you were ready to abandon me completely, I was investigating, fighting, preparing to save our family. Genuine forgiveness takes time, real behavior change, and above all, the restoration of trust. That doesn't happen in a conversation." Dorothy Mitchell appeared at that moment, walking slowly with her cane, but smiling for the first time in years. At 82, she had recovered $310,000 of the $380,000 stolen by Jason. "Mr. Cooper, thank you for giving me back my dignity. Yesterday I bought a steak for the first time in 2 years. Those simple words, 'I bought a steak,' meant more to me than all of Melissa's apologies." Dorothy Mitchell represented all the victims Jason had left in his path of destruction. Her justice was my justice. That night, home alone for the first time in 8 months, without the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest, I pulled Evelyn's photograph from the drawer where I'd kept it throughout the legal battle. "We did it, my love. We didn't just get our money back. We saved other families from going through the same hell." The answer came as it always did, not in audible words, but in a deep, warm peace that filled my heart like an eternal embrace. I could almost hear Evelyn's voice whispering, "I'm proud of you, Franklin. You've risen from that fall stronger than ever." Jason Turner had calculated that a 70-year-old man would be easy prey for his family's manipulation machine. He had bet that the public humiliation of a fall would break me psychologically, that my own daughter's betrayal would devastate me emotionally, that the systematic theft of my resources would defeat me financially. But he made 3 fatal miscalculations. First, he underestimated the strategic intelligence of a man who had built a financial empire with 20 borrowed dollars. Second, he didn't count on the unwavering loyalty of true friends like David and Clara Reynolds. Third, and most importantly, he failed to understand that sometimes being knocked down is exactly what we need to discover what we're truly made of when we decide to fight back. At 70, Franklin Cooper not only survived the most diabolical conspiracy of his life, he emerged stronger, wiser, and completely free of the illusions about family that nearly destroyed him. Melissa might one day earn my full forgiveness, but that would depend entirely on the choices she made in the years to come. For now, I was at peace. Dignity had been restored, justice had prevailed, and Dorothy Mitchell could buy steaks again. Sometimes revenge really is a dish best served cold, and I've never tasted anything so delicious in my life. My story confronts us with questions that haunt thousands of American families every day. How far should we go to protect our dignity when we're betrayed by the people we love most? I faced the most painful dilemma a father can face, discovering that my daughter had been manipulated into becoming an accomplice to my own financial ruin. Was my revenge a matter of justice or a display of cruelty? Should I have forgiven Melissa immediately after the trial, or does my caution in rebuilding trust reflect the bitter wisdom of someone who has learned that unconditional love can be used as a weapon against us? How would you react if you discovered your own family had been manipulated into signing documents that would drain your life savings? Would you have the psychological strength to investigate, gather evidence and fight back? Or would you resign yourself to fate as so many victims do? And most importantly, could you maintain your humanity intact during such a brutal war for survival? My experience resonates especially in an age where financial predators have become increasingly sophisticated, specifically targeting older people through the psychological manipulation of their loved ones. I hope my story can inspire anyone to remain vigilant against signs of family manipulation and to appreciate the importance of protecting not only our material possessions, but also our fundamental dignity as human beings. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more stories that explore the darkest depths of family relationships and the limits of human nature when faced with absolute betrayal. Leave a comment. Was I a hero of justice or a man who allowed revenge to poison my heart? How would you deal with a family betrayal of this magnitude? And most importantly, do you believe that some family wounds are too deep to be completely healed?